Hey everyone, welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I'm Anne, and I am so happy to be joined by my Springs in the Desert teammates, and I do mean in the desert, Cassie and Ian. Hey friends, how are you?
Hey Anne, we're doing great. How are you?
Doing well. It's snowing as we're recording, but you are in the actual desert in Arizona, so I'm imagining it's not snowing there.
It's not snowing, but we can see snow clouds on the mountains over there, so that's exciting.
Ah,
Yeah, we live
okay.
near the Pinal Mountains, and yeah, that's where we get hit with the snow typically. Like, oh, it snowed last night, but yeah, we can see it and appreciate it, but we don't have to drive in it, so that's kind of nice.
That is nice. That is nice. Well, today we are going to dive into a topic that is not really something that we have talked about in the ministry. We've sort of talked about intimacy and the importance of that generally, especially in a season of infertility. But today we want to go a little bit deeper in that. On that topic, and we want to talk about that intimacy in a season of infertility and how we can sort of keep the spark alive in our marriages. Now, just so everybody knows, this is not going to be the satin sheets and scented candles kind of discussion, right? But we want to have just a really sort of honest and positive kind of conversation about what intimacy and the marital embrace really can look like sometimes when we are walking in a season of infertility. And I guess we want to start off with maybe some of the, I don't know if you would call them obstacles or maybe difficulties or pressures or anxieties that we might feel around our intimate marital life during a season of infertility. So, Cassie, why don't you start off? What are some things that you can think of that can sometimes create sort of complicated feelings around intimacy?
Yeah, I think when you are trying to achieve pregnancy, especially, it can become a point, like a pressure point or a chore or some kind of feeling like it needs to be done at a certain time and you have to be very regimented with your charting, and you can kind of lose some of that romance along the way.
Yeah.
You can also have a lot of conflicting feelings sometimes about it, um, like you might be just nervous. Is what's going to be the outcome of this? Are we like if things don't happen, did we do something wrong?
Mhm.
There could be so many different things going through your mind when you're thinking about being intimate with your spouse.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think fear. You mentioned fear. I think that that can be one. Also, fear that if we are together, it's going to result in another negative pregnancy test, or fear maybe that we're not sort of living up to what our spouse expects and needs from us, particularly if we're in this season of infertility and we're trying to achieve a pregnancy. We can maybe feel that fear of like not being enough for our spouse. Ian, maybe you can speak to that a little bit too, kind of from the male perspective.
Yeah, I think that at least for my own experience, I think about being preoccupied, being confused. Which way do we go? Am I doing things right? Another kind of area that I would go into is kind of like meaninglessness. For
Mhm.
us, we pretty much were told like, oh, you're not going to be able to conceive. So it kind of going through the phases of trying to figure out, well, what do we do? How often should we, get together, this way and, intimately. And so I think that those are some other kind of avenues that men might experience. And maybe even frustration, with the process of, Lord, what are we doing? Things aren't seeming to work out. So I think those are some other areas that my brothers in Christ might be going through.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because God has so beautifully designed us to have sex and intimacy, and the procreation of children, bound together in this way, which is so beautiful. But I think you bring up a really great point, Ian, that if we're having trouble conceiving, or if we are in a season where conception is unlikely or it's not possible, for example, with a diagnosis, but also if we've entered into menopause, ladies, we might be sort of thinking, in a way, what is the point of sex? And we might unintentionally have lost a little bit of that spark, if you would, for our spouse, and how that marital embrace should really be bringing us together, really bonding us,
Hmm.
in not only a physical but an emotional and kind of spiritual way. As I was thinking about this topic, I was also thinking how difficult it can be sometimes. Cassie, you mentioned some of those pressures that are like internal to us, but there's also kind of those exterior pressures. Like, I was thinking about the kinds of comments that people would make. Like, everyone has heard, if you're trying to conceive, oh, just relax, right? Or, oh,
Hmm.
go on a romantic vacation, or, try this and try that. And sometimes that can really feel like an intrusion into our personal, intimate sexual lives, can it? Kind of like,
Hmm.
whoa, wait a minute. Like, I don't want to give you that kind of access to, to our sexual lives. And that can also make it really hard, and kind of put some additional pressure on us.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. When you start talking about the fact that you are trying to conceive, it makes other people seem to just want to give you all sorts of advice about your intimate life, and that's
Yeah.
can be confusing, annoying, um, and just add an extra layer of the way that things should be or the way that other people think they must be. Like, oh, must be great. You don't have to worry about abstaining. You can just, do this whenever you want. And it's just like, I don't really want to have those kind of conversations all the time. Let's just keep this between ourselves. But yeah.
That
Yeah, it
reminds
can.
me. Oh, go ahead. Mhm. Oh
Go
yeah,
ahead,
it
Ian.
just reminds me of, I remember there was, a couple that we were talking to. I don't think they were really deep in their faith, but they were just like, oh, just really enjoy it, just enjoy this time together. It's like, yeah, well, it's been going on for 15 years, so I guess I'll keep on so it's, yeah, they totally miss the experience you're going through. They act as though like, it's just, you're having a really great vacation. It's like, no, we're not.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up about this idea of enjoyment and enjoying of sex. So I wonder if we could talk about that for a second. Maybe first of all, the sort of obstacles, maybe is the word, to that enjoyment, and then kind of the real good of enjoying that marital embrace with our spouse.
um, I think part of what might take some of the joy out of it is focusing only on the procreation aspect. Sometimes you get in that mindset, and it can almost be like we're objectifying our spouse, like we're seeing this intimate act with them as a means to an end, and not focusing on the unity of the spouses and the mutual enjoyment of one another, just for who we are, not for what we can produce or what we can give, or what we can, yeah, what can result from that. And I think one of the ways that helps me, is to remember that every time you come together, you are renewing your wedding vows, and God is faithful to make that life giving. And we don't really get to determine what the fruit is going to be, but we get
Yes.
to receive it. And it's it's a joy, and it's a blessing. And we get to witness what God is doing through our coming together in love, no matter what the outcome is. So yeah, like, not like never we never want to separate that procreative and unitive act. We want to always be open to life, and be united with each other in mutual self gift and everything. So, always keeping those things together is, I think, a help to keeping that enjoyment there.
Yeah, I think that's so important that you brought those two things together, Cassie. And it goes to what we said a few minutes ago about, well, if conception is not possible because of a diagnosis or because of menopause, we might say, well, what's the point? And obviously, there's not going to be a procreative aspect there, right? Like there's not going to be a child that results from our union. So we might think that the union is not life giving. It's all just about pleasure and enjoyment. But what you say is so true that every time we come together with our spouse, that is an amazing opportunity to give life to each other. And if
Hmm.
we're really, sort of fruitful within our marriage, I think it's from there that all these different ways of giving life kind of spill out through,
Hmm.
through our marriage out into the world. So yeah, I think that's a really, really important point to kind of keep together. What other things, what other ways do you think we can, um, okay, let's stop that because I got off track when you raised your hand. So
Oh,
let's
sorry.
just
Should I have
pause.
said something?
No, no,
Sorry.
no,
Oh.
that's okay. Let's just pause for a second and
Because they
then,
can edit this, Ian.
right.
I can go ahead now.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, another thought, along that same vein, as you ladies are talking about, a big part of that is attraction. A big part of your relationship is when you first encounter one another. You've never met each other before, and you see each other, and there's that whole love at first sight. There's a great excitement to really want to understand this other person. You see them, they're attractive. Oh, I want to know their name. What do they do for fun? What is their favorite flavor? You start to go down all these kind of these uh, aspects of that person that you really want to understand more. So you have this deep desire when you first met each other. And I think a lot of that gets lost in where we tied the whole idea together of, yes, it's unitive. The sexual act is unitive, but also, for procreative. But if you overrate the whole procreative, like, oh, we're supposed to be trying to get pregnant, and this is, it really can take away from that pursuit, the romance of getting to know each other, having that adventure of and wonder and awe of this other person. And that's actually the prerequisite before you even could have any type of physical intimacy, is to understand each other, familiarity with one another, attraction for one another. And then you can, have more eye to eye contact, holding hands, a hug, a kiss, and it escalates from there. And I think that, yeah, that's one of those things that kind of gets lost, I think, over the years as we get into that whole process of trying to fix our fertility when the fertility was already there. You're attracted to one another, you love one another, and yeah, it's very, very special.
I love that, and in a sense, the fertility is already there, right? Like that kind of aptness for giving life to each other. And you're right, Cassie. We don't know how that's going to bear fruit in the world. God knows that, and He is bearing fruit in our marriages now, in so many different ways, regardless of whether it manifests in exactly the way that we want or that we hope for. So yeah, I think those are really important points to keep in mind. Before we kind of move off and start talking about maybe some of the positive or practical ways that we can try to engender more intimacy in our relationships. Cassie, we were talking before we came on about some of the other really specific maybe difficulties or frustrations that can enter into our intimate lives. So maybe you can share a little bit about those.
From a health aspect, yeah,
Yeah.
so a lot of couples who are experiencing infertility are also going through medical things like endometriosis, PCOS, or many other types of things. And it's just so important to look into those things to see if there's anything that is kind of like getting in the way of your physical intimacy being enjoyable and being not painful. Because if it's painful or if you're not able to enjoy it, that is a sign that that can be a sign that there is something medically that can be done to help. So that might be like hormonal supplementation or pelvic floor physical therapy that can be a huge blessing to your marriage. So I want to make sure that we are aware of that because it's not often talked about, but it plays a big role.
Yeah, that's right. And that's so important. And, that goes to this idea that, some of these, I guess, maybe puritanical or prudish ideas about sex that still kind of linger, even,
Hmm.
when this culture that seems like it's just so sexually kind of open, and even some of the things that we see on television, maybe when we were growing up, we would never kind of see those kinds of things on television and movies. But even so, when it comes to our intimate lives, we can feel funny about talking about it or expressing it, and even perhaps coming to our doctor
Hmm.
or to a counselor to kind of reveal those kinds of things. So, yeah, like you said, if there's pain, if there's lack of enjoyment, if there's any kind of emotional detachment, any difficulties like that in your sexual intimacy, it's okay to talk about that. It's okay to bring that to your doctor or in counseling, because
Hmm.
we want to make sure that we have like a holistically healthy sexual life and marital intimacy, and so we shouldn't be afraid of those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and adding to that, thank you for bringing that up, ladies. I definitely think that has been a really big cross in our marriage. I didn't realize how big it was just because it just kind of morphed over the years. But as Cassie was mentioning, when it comes to like hormones, it was really difficult because a lot of the Catholic doctors, we went with a lot of Catholic doctors and some non-Catholic Christian and whatnot that were very good at what they do. But when it came to the hormones, they were like, oh yeah, progesterone, estrogen, and just kind of figure those out, or just do one or do the other. But the more that Cassie was learning and reading about it, and the more she was troubleshooting it, things just weren't syncing up. She was still going through, just some really rough patches. Some of these kind of these depressions that were, that were hormonal, and was due to her body not producing them. And it was very tricky. And it took us many years till she finally, just very recently, ran across a really good doctor that was very open minded and said, hey, you also need, it's progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. Women need a bit of testosterone in there, and that needs to be brought together. And that doctor, single-handedly, after just like literally she had one or two appointments with that doctor, and she got her this hormone treatment that is just terrific. I mean, it's just night and day. And a lot of times over the years, when now as I sit here and look at this really awesome happening in my marriage, like, man, I was hard on myself, or I thought, as me, I wasn't doing things right. I wasn't courting her right. I can't ever say the right thing, to be more, physically intimate with my wife. And, oh, and she's down again today. What can I do to bring up her day? And the thing is it was hormonal. It was something that she didn't have control of, that she knew of. I didn't. So it was one of those things that counseling and prayer. I mean, of course, prayer, we're asking the Lord for his divine intervention and his grace and to send the right people, Lord. But it took a long time. And if it's anything that we could share in our story, it's, find a doctor that's progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, all holistically, because it was just, wow. It was a
And I
huge
think
difference.
that, yeah, that experience also helped us to be able to develop intimacy in different ways really well through communication and through, those date nights and like marriage enrichment type things. So those were also a big blessing. You know, they also help to increase our feelings of connectedness and everything through a really challenging time. Um, so those are both important aspects, you know, your physical health, your mental health, and just your communication and your relationship development at all levels all go hand in hand and all help each other to improve.
Yeah, and I mean, and your spiritual health too, right? Like Ian, you mentioned prayer. I mean, all of those aspects are important to attend to. I'm so glad that you went in that direction, Ian, because I think this is a great way to now move into some of the sort of practical or just encouraging ways that we can start looking at our intimate life together with our spouse. And that was a it was so great that you shared all of that, Ian, because it does show that communication is so important. I mean, we talk about that just generally in marriage, right? But recognizing the first of all the male female differences, not only in how we process things or how we communicate or don't communicate very
Mm-hmm.
well, but those physical differences, those hormonal differences, so important to have that communication, right? Because, Ian, you could have just easily looked at Cassie and just said like what's the matter with you? Are you going crazy, or what's happening? So
Mm-hmm.
it's really important for us to, I think, be able to talk to each other
Hmm.
when there is something that's going on with our health or spiritually or emotionally. And also with regard to our sexual life and our intimacy, it's important for us to be able to communicate with each other. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, Cassie, if something is hurting, to
Hmm.
say, hey, wait a minute, I think something's not right. And I mean, our spouse is that one person that we should be absolutely, able to be open and honest with.
Hmm.
Safety and
Yeah.
being vulnerable. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So what are some others? Let's kind of bring the conversation full circle. And what are some particular ways that we can maybe encourage each other and sort of help our intimate lives together, help to have a nice, healthy, intimate experience with each other in marriage.
Oh, one thing I'd love to lead the charge on this one. I really do think that one of the greatest, I kind of say, kind of fruits of what we went through was really learning to attune to my wife. That's one of my favorite words, this emotional attunement. A lot of times when you are trying to be physically intimate, both of you could be preoccupied. You could be stressed out. You're trying to, navigate something online, and your spouse is trying to touch you, and you're like, get away from me. So a lot of it is tuning into each other, like, hey, how was your day? So it's kind of recognizing that you need to stop whatever you're doing and tune into one another. Say, hey, how was your day? How's everything going? And and usually you'll catch on to the feeling they're going, like, yeah, I'm really stressed out, about this thing that happened, or I'm really excited, because this happening at work, and I'm getting possibly going to get a promotion or however. And you can really begin that bond of connecting with one another over that feeling. You don't have to solve anything. It's just, oh, you're stressed out. I hear you. Hang strong, hang strong, sweetheart. And there's something about, like, it just brings about this peace by just simply acknowledging it. And I think that's been huge for us, kind of getting warmed up to one another, and that beginning the process of more physical intimacy. I think that's been one of the greatest kind of gifts I see that the Lord has given me, as a man, as a husband, to really be like, okay, she's going through a tough time, and I know I am too, but how can I tune into her? And it seems to work like a charm, but it's not easy, but it's been really rewarding.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome, Cassie.
definitely. And I think looking at your connection together as like engaging in creative problem solving together, like how can we make this more special? How can we make it more um, enjoyable, whatever. So it's not like um, one or the other trying to kind of like fix things on their own, but like looking at it as something that you're coming together on to try and make it great. And also trying to see how you can reduce stress and just have shared enjoyable experiences in general. Um, like like continuing those date nights and going and doing fun things together, and just making sure that life isn't like so intense and overwhelming all the time as it can be during a season of infertility. So just trying to kind of balance that out with all of those things that help you really come alive and enjoy your physical body in general, um, aside from like all the treatments and things. And I did want to mention too that sometimes when you notice that that is really out of whack, you really are not um, coming together in enjoyment and everything. It's like sometimes there are times where taking a break from treatment is appropriate, is necessary to get back into balance with that act is all about. That it's
Yes.
um, or if treatment is coming in between, or is causing a lot of friction in your relationship, it's okay to take a break, to reconnect, and to think about what your next steps are together after you feel like really close, and that you're in this together, and your relationship is thriving, and where do we go from here?
I think that's so important because when you are in a season of trying, that can really be something fearful. Like to think, well, we're going to step back and take a break from the trying and the charting and all that. I mean, that can bring a lot of stress and fear. But it's okay. Like if that is something that you need to do to like nurture your marriage and nurture the intimacy in your marriage, that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that it is a forever, stopping charting or trying, but to have that time to just kind of reconnect and recharge,
Mm-hmm.
that intimacy and that love that you have for each other. I think that that's a really, really important point. We just have a couple of minutes left, but Ian, I wanted to kick it over to you because I know that the five love language, or it's the five, right? The five love
Five love
languages
languages.
is something that is really important to you, something that you have really connected with. So maybe in these last couple minutes, if you want to share a little bit about how maybe the five love languages can also help us to kind of reconnect and light a spark in that intimacy.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I think that is it's the way forward. I know we're going through a big emotional, spiritual journey with wherever we're at in the infertility journey. It could be just a lot of crazy events that are happening, and it's a matter of trying our best to step out of them, to give ourselves those. Just I try to get ourselves into a peaceful place, and those opportunities of being able to increase your physical intimacy actually are done by trying to connect with one another, I think, emotionally. And everybody is designed differently. So Gary Chapman came up with the five love languages. There's little quizzes you can take online of it, but they are quality time, acts of service, words of affirmation, gifts, and physical touch. And every person's different. So for me, I'm a very physical. I like physical touch. Cassie likes quality time. So in our early relationship, I was trying my best to hit her with all five things. But over time, I had a preference of wanting to give her physical touch, and that was at the very bottom of her list. She wanted quality time. She wanted to have really good quality conversations. And so lo and behold, here it is 15 years of marriage, 15 years later. And that is the key to physical intimacy with my wife, of being able to touch her, that I yearn for it. It's my number one. I have to have a good, meaningful conversation with her. And guess what? The next thing you know, we're hugging, and I can get closer. And it's very, very powerful. It's such a gift from the Lord to realize how your spouse ticks. And yeah, so things like quality time, she really loves to have coffee and talk on Saturday morning. So that's one thing that we do. We talk about spiritual things, and we find ourselves talking a lot, even in the middle of the day, something going on. um, those all add up. Things like acts of service could be, doing some nice favors for your spouse. If they have a favorite hoodie and you wash it for them, making it nice and fresh, that's an act of service. So it's a gift to them. You're scoring points, those brownie points. And so those kinds of activities, words of affirmation, being encouraging of them with whatever they're going through. Sweetheart, you're showing a lot of courage right now with what you're going through with all these appointments. And I couldn't imagine what you're going through. You're my shiro. You're just doing an amazing job. That can be like $1 million feeling that you're giving your spouse, and it didn't cost you $1 million. It didn't cost you a cent. It was just recognizing and affirming and encouraging them. And then also, some people like gifts. They like the flowers and the chocolates and surprise gift. Great. So there are a lot of really neat ways that our spouses tick. I highly encourage couples to go do a little online assessment of, figure out your spouse's top 2 love languages and work on that, and you will see yeah, it'll really be I think transformational in how you relate to one another and being more physically intimate.
Yeah, and then if you already have heard of the 5 love languages and you already know what your spouse's top ones are, and just try to get really good at those, really creative. And that's one of the fun things about marriage is getting to, like Ian says, like getting a PhD in your spouse. Like you know them better than anybody, and you can make it like a personal challenge to be like, ooh, how can I up the ante in showing them love in the way that they understand it and receive it best.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way to deepen your bond, and also for your spouse to kind of see how that you care enough to want to know how you can make them feel safe and loved, and how you want to draw closer to them. Yeah, I think that is just such great advice. Whether or not you go to that book or any other tools, just communicating and getting to know your spouse again and again and again, right? And that helps us to not take each other for granted either, and that can only deepen our intimacy. Well, this has been such a great conversation. Cassie and Ian, thank you so much for coming on to talk about what's kind of a delicate topic, but it's a really important one too.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
thank
you,
you.
Anne. Thank you for having us on.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you. It's an honor.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, friends, we hope that you can take some of these ideas and just begin to work on your own intimate life in your marriage. Just remember that your marriage is so good and that it's so important for you to continue to deepen that bond, and to remember to bring the Lord into that conversation too, because He will help to really tighten up that bond too. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.